one of my pet peeves as a filmmaker is how many people don't understand what a master shot is. And this is even true of filmmakers themselves. So it's not like a normal person doesn't know what a master shot. And especially as a film educator, I deal with this every semester and I have to correct people and fix it. Language is very, very important in this industry. We have our own jargon, but then we also have really confusing jargon, like what's a beat, and is a beat, a directing thing, is a beat a sound thing, is a beat a script thing. So anyways, there are a lot of things that I can go on in other videos. But most recently, I've had my directing students put together their storyboards and their shot lists for their directing project. And we talked about storyboards in a different video, and you don't need to know how to draw, and it's a tool for communication, all this stuff. And the storyboards, for the most part, were fine. The problem is when you take the storyboard, which is kind of the first pre-visualization of the script, and then turn it into a production document, which is a shot list, and how do you kind of interpret and make sure that what you are planning from a visual standpoint will make sense from a physical production standpoint. And so I go through this whole thing about how to best do that, and I can go through that in another video, but always, there ends up being this question, or it's often the first question that I ask is, what is your first shot of the day for your scene? And I'll get a lot of blank stares, and I'll be like, well, for the most part, as a general rule, and again, it depends, there are a few different things, and why this might not be true, but traditionally, your first shot of the day is your master shot. So what's a master shot? And then people will always say an establishing shot. And I'm like, no, it's not an establishing shot. Now, it could serve as an establishing shot, but so could a drone shot over LA, establishing that we're in LA before we get into the scene. Like, that's an establishing shot. The house in San Francisco before we go into, what was that show called? The one with the twins. Anyways, that is an establishing shot. An establishing shot is basically like, here we are in the world, and it doesn't necessarily have to include your characters. But your master shot is a shot is typically a wide shot, which is why it can get confusing or similarly associated with an establishing shot, of your scene. And the reason why it's called a master is because it covers your entire scene, so that, if there's a power strike or a hurricane descends, or somebody ends up sick violently in the middle of the shoot, you have to call it a day, something horrible happens, you at least have a building block of your story that, worst case scenario, you can edit into your timeline and still tell the story of your movie. Yes, it'll be just from this one wide shot perspective, but it at least has all the movement and the dialogue and the action and the reason why you need this story or this scene in the script in the first place, as opposed to cutting it. You at least have the whole entirety of that scene in this one master shot. So some people, by design, will just have a master shot, which is where we see these amazing oneers in movie where they kind of track the main character and we see the world, and it's 5 minutes of the scene and it never cuts, and that's amazing. That's essentially what a master shot is, it's except in typical coverage, which is usually what you often plan, that is just from whatever kind of fixed wide shot perspective. And then you go in for the over the shoulders and close ups, and you might have some insert shots. And again, that's the kind of shot list aspect of it. But you always start with the master shot of the scene. Now, what are some of the reasons why you might not do that? The first is technical. If you have a difficult technical shot that requires a lot of equipment preparation, you want to do that first. So if you've got a dolly shot or a jib arm or something, a tracking shot as they're running, like, you want to get that done first, even if it's just a portion of the scene, because from an efficiency standpoint, you want your crew as fresh as possible. You also want to be able to call the shot, like pull it, if it's just taking too long. If the dolly tracks on that cracked sidewalk in the middle of this, in this kind of city street is just never going to be level, and you just keeps bumping and it's just not at all what you want. As a director, do you say, screw it, let's not get the shot at all? Or do we live with how the shot looks and use what we can? Because that's the other thing too, is that eventually you will be editing. The purpose of coverage is to have a scene that will be edited together from various angles of coverage, not a oneer that follows and never cuts, So that's the purpose of coverage. So the only thing, or the main thing, that trumps the master shot and doing that first would be something technical with the equipment. And then you do the master. The other reason why you might not shoot the master first is when you're dealing with children and animals, because again, they are going to be fresh and the best when they first arrive, and not after they've shot the master and shot the overs and shot stuff that they were kind of like in the background for, and then you get to their close-up and they've been on set for 4 hours and they're just like and their performance is terrible. So you want to shoot children and animals first. That sounds bad. And then you can go and get the other coverage afterwards, because you're farther away. It doesn't matter if they didn't quite hit the performance. So those are really like the only two reasons. I'm open to other people chiming in. But oftentimes when I have students turn in their shot list, they'll have something that's like shot number 1, close up on the insert, of the paper on the table. And it's like, no, that might be the first shot of your storyboard, but that is not the first shot on your shot list. Like, you want to cover your story. Like, you've gathered all these people here, you've got these actors in place, you want to shoot the most amount of your scene that you possibly can before you run out of time and energy. And so you kind of start big, where, okay, we're going to cover the entire scene from a wide shot that can still be artistically or interestingly composed and designed, but it shows as much as you can the movement of the people in the space and helps to establish where they are and shows their relationship and interaction, the body language between them, as well as whatever story points you need. And then you can go in for your other coverage that's typically tighter. You also might not need to cover the entire scene from those other tighter shots. You might just want to get that one main punchline in their close-up, and you don't need the rest of it. Again, a lot of it depends on time and energy and the production pacing and all that stuff. But one of the other reasons why I find master shots really helpful is because it's essentially like a oneer. It really helps the actors get into their performance because they're moving through the space, they're interacting in the most natural way possible. It's like a play. Whereas film, especially when you're just punching in for one line, can feel very fragmented and you're often shooting out of order. And so the actors are constantly having to remember what they just said or where they were just coming from and, what they're trying to do and what's happening in this scene. And so a master can really help sync everybody into the performance, not just the actors, but the cast and the crew. They know what's happening. They understand the dynamics of the scene. And then when you punch in for the closer coverage, they know how to kind of make sure that that really helps sell the scene for the later edit. But like I said, you shoot the master first because if the apocalypse happens, you at least can edit into your movie and tell your movie. Like if you never get to pick up the other coverage, you still have a movie because you've got the bulk of the scene in this oneer from this wide shot and you can move on. And even though it might establish the location and therefore be an establishing shot, that is not its purpose. So, master shots. First shot in every scene as you plan your day, and then you go into your other coverage with few exceptions. So, please stop calling them establishing shots.